Now at this point, I've got a 3-quart saucepan. Rinse it out with cold water. The reason I use cold water is because it's chlorinated. It doesn't come from the hot water here. Chlorine is good to sterilize it. And of course it depends on who your water department is, but I like to rinse it out with just plain cold water. I don't bother with what you can wipe it out with a paper towel if you want, but what I do is I just tilt it to one side and let it sit a minute. The water with gravity and the natural hydrogen attraction, it'll bring itself together, and then you just pour it off. And that'll get most of the water out, and then you just put that on your stove there. We want to put the heat on medium, and we've got 4 cups of milk. And the 4 cups of milk can just go straight in there. That's cold milk. I had that in the refrigerator. Now, what we want to do here. Now, every stove is different. I've timed this out for 20 minutes. So I'm going to set a timer. I'm going to go ahead and set it to 18 minutes. Just so I can keep a heads up. On my stove, it takes about 15 to 20 minutes on medium. Because I've tested this before, and once you've done it once, then you'll know how long it takes to get to temperature. So it makes it a little easier. We're going to bring this just under 200 degrees Fahrenheit. We do not want to scorch it at all. Okay, right away what I'm going to do is I've got a thermometer here, and it's very important not to get your thermometer in your milk. But this comes off like this and it goes in like this, and I'm going to give it a quick wrench with a clean paper towel. I'm just going to wipe the end of it, make sure that's clean. This goes in. The way I insert this, it happens to, this works for me on this pot. You may have to figure out something different, but this works for me. And I touch the tip to the bottom. I turn it so that the tip is touching the bottom, and then I rotate it out so it's just off the bottom. You don't want your thermometer to be touching your heat source. You want it to be on the object you're measuring. But before that heats up, and I'm going to go ahead and add, you don't have to do this, but this gives your yogurt culture a little extra food. I've got some powdered milk, and I'm just going to add a little bit of powdered milk to your yogurt. That's optional. It'll work just as well, but this helps it firm up a little bit better. It makes your yogurt culture happy. Okay, now at this point, I've got a special whisk, and I always give it a little wrench, shake it off. Before I put the thermometer on there, I should do this first. I go in there and I mix it with the powdered milk. And there's some professionals, professionals that say you should not agitate your milk when you do this. And they think that that foam on the top is a bad idea. But I disagree. I actually think this works better for a couple of reasons. I like what it does. I think it helps the way the proteins work. The long chain proteins when you whisk it a little bit. And that little bit of foam on the top actually helps like a blanket and insulate it. I actually do this throughout the process. Let's get this thermometer back on there. And again, touch the bottom. Rotate it just up. Alright. Now I'm going to wrench this off. Dry that. And then with the whisk, what I do with the whisk is that goes into the yogurt bowl here with the yogurt. And I put the lid on, make sure this lid doesn't slide off, but I leave it just under the lid there on the corner. And that'll keep both out of the dust and the air and whatnot while we're working. Now back over at the stove, I've got this special ladle, and I rinsed this under cold water and shook it off. Throughout the process, and I should have started a little bit earlier, but I'm lollygagging here. Throughout this 20-minute process, what I do is I continuously give the milk a little stir from time to time, and pour this over the thermometer, the stem of the thermometer, not all the way to the top, just on the lower stem, and this will give you an accurate temperature. And I reach in there every now and then and make sure that my thermometer is not touching the side of the bowl. Again, you want to measure the temperature on your product, not your equipment. And I keep an eye on that. Right now it looks like we're at just about 165, which we're pasteurizing it now. And you don't have to take it all the way to scalding temperature, but I tend to do that. And when you scald it, one of the reasons you want to continuously do this with the milk is that if you don't stir it, the proteins, as they coagulate, tend to sink to the bottom and scorch to the bottom. And you don't want to scorch it. Now when you scald it, you're going to get some of that anyway. And if you take this ladle and just rub the backside of it on the phone, you can feel the bumpiness of the milk sticking to the bottom. But you don't want to stir that up. And whatever you do, you don't want to scrape it up. Leave it on the bottom. That's normal during scalding. It's a step above pasteurization. So we'll just leave that. Don't be afraid if you don't think you've ruined it. If that little bit sticks to the bottom, main thing is that you just don't stir it up. You don't want to scrape it up, because then if you scrape it up, then you'll have a mess, and you'll ruin the flavor of it and everything, and it'll just be a mess. So do it like this, and it's coming up close to temperature here pretty fast. Another way you can tell you're getting near the end, even without the thermometer, I'm above 175, close to 180 now, but even without the thermometer, the way you can tell where you might be getting to where it's either sticking on the bottom, where you're in the scalding territory, is when the steam starts to rise off of the surface. Water boils at, I believe it's 212 degrees Fahrenheit, so when you're getting steam, you're getting pretty hot. And it's not really necessary. At this point, I could take it off right now if I wanted to, but I like to hold it at this temperature for a little bit, so I'll go a little bit further. And what I'll do is I'll cut the heat off when it gets to 200, and I'll let it ride, and I'll just continue to stir it, even with the heat off, for just a little bit. And then we'll switch gears here. When the temperature starts to fall on the thermometer, that's when we're going to go back to the sink, and we're going to do a water bath here in a second. Once you have the heat turned off, wait till the temperature is stabilized from the internal temperature, and when it starts to fall a little bit, then you can relax. You can stop stirring it, and you can move on to something else. Now, when I say stir it, I'm not really stirring it like from the bottom. You don't want to touch the bottom. What I'm doing is taking the milk from the top, and I'm bathing it. Just keep the current flowing throughout. And some of that foam, if you want to knock some of that foam down, you can play with it, But it's not really important, that is. I'm just keeping the current going here. And I'm right at 200 right now, so I'm getting closer. So I turn the stove off. And this would be a good time. I'm also going to check the oven stone here. Yeah, that's plenty hot. I turn the oven off as well. And if your oven's over 140 degrees, go ahead and vent your oven as well. You can let some of that heat out if you want, but I'll do that in a minute. Right now I'm just going to keep stirring this a little bit here. Keep it. Basically, milk has long chains of protein in it. On a very microscopic level, it's almost like, cook spaghetti. Imagine spaghetti in the molecule world. It's just a good idea to keep them moving. You don't want them settling or sitting still. This kind of keeps everything consistent, the temperature throughout. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this off the heat so we can shift gears. I could stand here and stir it for a little bit more, but it's really not necessary. You don't have to be real exact on this temperature. You just don't want to get it above 200 degrees, and you don't want to overdo it. Otherwise, you will have a problem. So I'm going to put this off to the side here, and then we're going to switch gears to move back to the sink.